They told me the tremor was basalt harmonic. 11 years of logs, 11 years of the Sonics team running their passes, pulling their readouts, shrugging at the numbers, and writing the same 3 words in the margin. Basalt harmonic. Anomalous. As if writing it twice made it less of a problem. I filed their reports upward and never said a word, because the numbers didn't match any basalt harmonic I'd logged in 40 years of survey work, and I had logged enough of them to know the difference between a rock vibrating because that's what rock does, and a rock vibrating because something inside it is paying attention. But I didn't say that either. You don't say things like that at 61, not if you want to keep your survey license. My name is Kael Drovven. I spent 40 years pulling drill cores on dead worlds for the Colonial Geological Survey, which is an organization that has a very high tolerance for strange numbers and a very low tolerance for strange conclusions. I was good at my job because I had my father's hands and my grandfather's patience, and because I knew, in some way I could never quite put a name to, when a formation was telling me something, and when it was just rock being rock. The survey paid me for the former. They had no use for the latter. So I kept the latter to myself for 4 decades and did not examine it too closely, because the thing you don't examine too closely is usually the thing that has been keeping you functional. Shaft 7 on Survey World Ven Karat was my last assignment, 23 months on a volcanic basalt shelf on a world that smelled of sulfur and old iron, boring a survey line 3 kilometers into the lithosphere to map the thermal gradient for a proposed colonial energy installation. Good work. Quiet work. The kind of work you give a geologist who is 6 months from retirement and needs nothing to go wrong. Nothing went wrong, exactly. The anomaly had been there from the first day we hit the 2,000-meter mark, a resonance frequency in the formation that the drill rod sensors logged but couldn't classify. The Sonics team ran 4 full spectral analyses over the 11 months of active drilling, and came back each time with the same shrug. I logged it, filed it, and every time I ran a calibration check on the rod sensors, I pressed my palms flat against the drill rod housing and felt the frequency move through the steel and into my hands, up my wrists, into my chest. A warmth that wasn't the geothermal gradient, a rhythm that wasn't the drill rotation. I told myself it was the rod vibrating. That's what you tell yourself when you're 61 and 6 months from retirement, and the alternative explanation requires you to revise everything you thought you knew about what your hands have been doing for 4 decades. Decommission day came on a Tuesday. The plug-and-seal crew arrived at first light and began the withdrawal of the drill rod assembly from Shaft 7 while I ran the closeout paperwork. Standard procedure required a final in-shaft inspection before the plug was poured, visual confirmation of bore wall integrity, temperature reading at depth, no anomalous settling or fracture at the bore face. I had done this inspection on every shaft I had ever closed in 40 years of survey work. I descended alone. The cage dropped me 3 kilometers in 11 minutes, which is a long time to be alone with your own thoughts in a steel box with the smell of hot basalt coming up from below. I thought about my father, the way he used to press his palm against the quarry face in the eastern galleries of our homeworld before he marked his cut lines. I had asked him once why he did it. He said his father had done it, and his father's father before that, and you pressed your palm against the rock to feel whether it was ready to be cut, or whether it needed more time. I was 11 years old. I thought it was the most sensible thing I had ever heard. The cage stopped at the 3-kilometer mark. The drill rod assembly had been fully withdrawn. The bore face was raw basalt, dark and close and warm in the cage's work light, still damp from the drill fluid wash. I ran the temperature probe along the wall, nominal. I checked the bore wall integrity at 3 sample points. No anomalous fracture, no settling. I wrote the readings into the closeout tablet, and then I pressed both palms flat against the bore face. I do not know exactly why I did it at that particular moment. In that particular geometry, hands at shoulder width, fingers spread, palms flush against the rock. I had pressed my palms against drill rod housings hundreds of times. I had never pressed them against a raw bore face at depth. It was a small difference. It felt, in the moment, like habit, like something my hands already knew how to do. The rock was warm, not geothermal warm, not friction warm from the drill. The warmth moved. It differentiated. It came to my palms the way a frequency finds a receiver, not heat spreading from a source, but recognition traveling to a point. I did not move. The frequency rose through my palms, up my wrists, into the bones of my forearms. It reached my sternum. It reached my jaw. It was not sound exactly. It was more like the way you know a low note in a large room. You feel it before you hear it. In the chest, in the teeth, in the place where the body stops being soft tissue and becomes something harder. A seam opened in the bore face, not a crack. A seam, a clean hairline aperture in the basalt at palm height, running horizontally between my two hands, perfectly level. Pale gold light came through it. Not bright, not dramatic. The way a lamp shows under a closed door, just enough to know there is a room on the other side, and that the room is occupied. I had been sealing boreholes for 40 years. I had sealed boreholes on 11 worlds. I had never seen basalt do that. The voice, if you can call it that, came through my jaw and my sternum simultaneously, the way bone conduction equipment transmits. No air, no speaker, just the frequency becoming language in the places where my skeleton was listening. It said 7 words. I will not reproduce all of them here, because some things are not for a closeout report. What I will say is that the last 4 were, reads it true, first Surveyor. I stood there for a long time with my palms against that rock. The seam held its light. The frequency held its warmth. Neither one pressed me. Neither one asked for anything. They had been here for 11,000 years. 11,000 years since the last time anything with the right hands and the right lineage had touched this formation from the inside, and they could afford to wait while I caught up with what I had just been told. My grandfather had pressed his palms against the coal seams in the deep galleries of the Drovven mine for 60 years. Not for warmth, not for ritual. Because the seam told him things. Pressure, stress, which panels were moving, and which were stable, which faces were ready, and which were not. He had saved 4 crews by listening to things no instrument registered. People said he had a gift. He said he just paid attention. My father pressed his palms against the quarry face before every cut. He said his father had done it. He said you pressed your palm against the rock to feel whether it was ready. I pressed my palms against every drill rod housing on 11 worlds for 40 years, and logged a warmth I told myself was the rod vibrating. It was not the rod. The builders had put something in the lithosphere of Ven Karat 11,000 years before the colonial survey existed. A distributed resonance instrument, not a discrete object, not a placed artifact, but the planet's own modified bedrock, tuned to a specific frequency, waiting for a specific key, and the key was not a code, or a signal, or a scanning frequency. The key was a pair of hands that had been carrying this calibration in their bones for 4 generations, passed down through a lineage of men who pressed their palms flat against stone and listened without knowing what they were listening for. I sealed Shaft 7. The plug-and-seal crew poured the casing. I signed the closeout forms. I filed my final survey report for the Colonial Geological Survey, which noted nominal bore wall integrity, nominal thermal gradient, and anomalous subsurface resonance of unknown origin. Basalt harmonic. Anomalous. No further action required. The cage took me up in 11 minutes. When I came out at the surface, the afternoon light on Ven Karat was the same sulfur gold it always was. The light that had nothing to do with any sun I knew from childhood. The alien light that had been falling on this shelf for 1 billion years before the first colonial survey marker went in the ground. I stood in it for a while. I am the same man I was this morning. Same hands. Same 40 years of cores and logs and closeout forms. Same grandfather's patience. Same father's palm-flat habit. Same silence about the things the instruments don't confirm. I just know, now, what my hands have been saying. I just know, now, that someone built them to say it.